For 3 years, I built my whole life around two things: my son and a job I never once took for granted. After the divorce, my hours shifted. I dropped him at school in the morning, I stayed late to make the time back at night, and my manager approved every bit of it in writing. I thought that made me reliable, careful, the kind of employee you keep. Then I sat in a conference room and listened to someone from HR tell me I was being let go for repeatedly leaving early and letting my team down. She had dates, specific ones. She read them out like they were facts everyone already agreed on. And that was the part one couldn't get past, because I remembered those dates. On one of them, I hadn't left early at all. I'd stayed until the floor was nearly dark, waiting on a report to finish uploading before I drove home. So either I was losing my grip on my own life, or someone had written down something that never happened. I needed to know which one it was. I want to go back to before any of that, because you can't understand how it fell apart until you see how carefully I'd built it. I was an operations analyst at a regional medical supply distribution company. Demand planning, mostly, I forecast what the warehouses would need so the hospitals we served never ran short. It's the kind of work nobody notices until it's wrong. And in 9 years there, I had made a quiet reputation out of it very rarely being wrong. My son, Eli, was 8. When his mother and I separated, the school mornings became mine, and that changed the shape of my day. I couldn't be at my desk by 8 anymore. So I did what you're supposed to do. I didn't hide it. I didn't wing it. I went to my manager, Dana Whitfield, and asked for an adjusted schedule. I'd come in at 9:15 after drop-off, and I'd make up every minute on the back end. Dana said yes. More than that, she put in writing. I still had the email, a short, friendly note confirming the arrangement, copied to HR, telling me to do what you need to do for your boy. I'd read that line more than once on hard mornings. I kept my side of it precisely. I was the last analyst on the floor most nights. I ate dinner at my desk more often than I'd admit to a doctor, and I kept a small thing to remind me why. A badge holder clipped to my bag, and tucked behind the ID card, a crayon drawing Eli had made me of a lopsided copper-colored sun. He'd said it was so the building would know I had somewhere to get back to. I thought about that drawing a lot more after everything happened. The first thing that fell off was so small I filed it away and forgot it. It was a Monday huddle, the whole team standing around Dana's desk, and she was talking about a busy quarter coming up. At the end, she said almost lightly, "I just need to know the team can count on everyone all the way through." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking a little past me. I told myself it was generic pressure, the kind of thing managers say. I had an email with her signature giving me my hours. What did I have to worry about? 2 weeks later, there was a calendar invite waiting when I logged in. Quick sync, Dana plus people team. No agenda. 15 minutes, first thing. I remember thinking it was probably about head count for the new fiscal year. I brought a notebook and a coffee. I did not bring a lawyer because it never once occurred to me that I'd need one. The room had 3 people in it, and none of them were smiling. Dana was there, a woman from HR I'd met maybe twice, and a laptop turned slightly away from me. The HR woman did the talking. She said the company had decided to end my employment effective that day, and that the separation was for cause. Those 2 words landed before I understood them. For cause. Not a layoff. Not restructuring. Cause. I asked what the cause was. She turned a printed letter around so I could read it and read it out loud at the same time, the way you would to a child. Repeated early departures. A pattern of leaving before the end of the workday. Failure to meet the reliability expectations of the team, despite the accommodation the company had extended to me. And then the dates. March 6th, March 14th, March 21st, April 2nd. She read each one like it closed the door. I didn't shout. I think some part of me had already gone very quiet and very careful, the way you do when the ground moves. What I felt under the shock was the arithmetic of my actual life. Eli's health insurance ran through this job. The mortgage ran through this job. The small, ordinary stability I had fought to rebuild for my son ran straight through this job. And they were dismantling it in 15 minutes over dates. But even sitting there, one of those dates was already snagging. March 14th. I knew that day. I hadn't left early on March 14th. I'd stayed late. Late enough that I'd emailed a finished forecast to the whole planning group when the office was nearly empty. I didn't say that in the room. I wasn't thinking clearly enough to defend myself, and something told me the room wasn't built for defending myself in. I signed nothing. I asked for a copy of the letter, and to my mild surprise, they gave me one. I put it in my bag next to the badge holder, and I walked out into a parking lot that was too bright, holding a piece of paper with 4 dates on it, and I fixed on the one I knew was wrong. That night, after Eli was asleep, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I checked. I opened my personal calendar, then my sent mail, because a habit 9 years deep doesn't switch off just because they've taken your desk. March 14, Saturday, they're in my sent folder like a witness. A forecast file, attached, time-stamped 6:52 in the evening, addressed to the planning group and to Dana herself. You do not send a department-wide report at 6:52 p.m. and also leave early. Both cannot be true. I went through the other dates the same way. Slower now, my heart doing something complicated. March 6th, I had a calendar block until 6 and a reply I'd sent at 6:11. March 21st, a meeting invite I'd accepted that ran to 5:45, and I never left the second a meeting ended, not once in 9 years. April 2nd was fuzzier, no email to anchor it, but the pattern was already loud. At least one of the 4 early departures was provably, documentably false. And if one line in an official letter was false, the whole letter stopped being a record of what I'd done and became something else. A story someone had chosen to tell, that reframed the fear. Up to that point, I'd been afraid I'd lost my job. Now I was afraid of something colder, that somebody had sat down and written dates I hadn't earned into a document that would follow me to every future employer who called for a reference. I didn't fall asleep so much as run out of night. But somewhere in there, I remembered a detail from 9 years of walking through the same set of glass doors. Every exterior door in that building logged a badge swipe. In and out. Time stamped. There was a record of when I actually left, and it wasn't kept by Dana, and it wasn't kept by HR. It was kept by the building. The problem was that I no longer had access to any of it. My badge was deactivated before I reached my car. I tried at the side door out of pure habit and got in a flat red light. So the record existed, and I couldn't touch it. That's where Marcus came in. Marcus Bell ran facilities and security systems, the cameras, the door controllers, the badge database. We weren't close, but over 9 years we traded enough small favors and bad coffee to have the kind of trust that doesn't need a lot of words. I called him, not from some clever plan, just because I didn't know who else kept the doors. I told him what the letter said. There was a long pause on the line, and then he said, "That's not right." Not as an opinion. As a man who watched those doors for a living. I want to be careful here because I didn't ask him to break anything. My exit swipe history was my own record of my own comings and goings, and he pulled it the way you'd pull a receipt. 2 days later, he sent me a plain spreadsheet, 1 row per swipe. I read it standing up in my kitchen, and then I sat down. March 6th, last exterior badge out, 6:38 p.m. March 14th, 7:04 p.m. March 21st, 6:15 p.m. April 2nd, 6:47 p.m. Every single one of the dates in that letter, the dates they said I'd left early. I'd left the building between 6:15 and just after 7. Under my approved schedule, I owed the company until 6. Not one of those 4 days had I gone early. Not one. The letter didn't have a soft spot in it. The letter was false, top to bottom, on the exact facts it used in my career. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I felt sick, because a mistake is 1 wrong date. 4 wrong dates, all bent the same direction, isn't a mistake. Somebody had written down departures that the building itself said never happened, and they'd done it in a document with my name on it and a signature line. The badge logs answered the question I'd started with. I wasn't losing my grip, but they replaced it with a worse one. Why would Dana, who signed my schedule and told me to take care of my boy, put her name on something the doors could disprove in an afternoon? I couldn't answer that from my kitchen, but I knew the next place to look. When they let you go, you have a right to your own personnel file, and I intended to read every page of mine. It took 2 written requests and 11 days, but the file came. It was thicker than I expected, and most of it was ordinary: reviews, the schedule approval, a training certificate from years back. I read it front to back twice. The second time, I found the 2 things that turned suspicion into something with a spine. The first was a written warning, a formal disciplinary write-up dated April 4th, describing my ongoing attendance problem and noting that I had been counseled. I had never seen it. No one had counseled me. There had been no conversation, no meeting, no email, nothing. You cannot be quietly warned in writing and never told. A warning you never receive isn't a warning, it's a prop. But there it sat in my file, giving the later letter its foundation, making the firing look like the end of a fair process instead of the beginning of an ambush. The second thing was quieter and, once I saw it, worse. Stapled behind the warning were documented team concerns, a short paragraph saying colleagues had raised worries about my availability. No names, no dates, no specific incident, just the shape of an accusation with none of the parts you could check. In 9 years of doing this work, I had learned one hard rule about evidence. The real thing has edges. It has a date, a sender, a number you can go verify. What has no edges is usually something built to look like evidence from a distance and dissolve up close. I kept coming back to that warning dated April 4th because something about it wouldn't sit flat. I read it a 4th time, slowly, and then I found it. The warning referenced by name a team planning meeting as the moment my attendance had again disrupted the group. I remember that meeting. It was on the shared calendar. It happened on April 11th. A warning dated April 4th cannot describe a meeting that hadn't happened until April 11th. You cannot document, on the 4th, an event from the 11th. The only way that sentence exists is if the warning was written after the 11th and then dated backward, stamped with an earlier day to make it look like it came before the decision instead of after it. The paper wasn't a record of a process. It was a costume sewn for a conclusion that had already been reached. I sat with that for a long time, because it meant the sequence of everything was reversed. In a fair process, you notice a problem, you document it, you counsel the person, and only then, if nothing changes, do you separate them. Here, the ending had come first, and then someone had gone back and manufactured the beginning. The question stopped being, was this a mistake? It became who needed my firing to look justified, and why. There was one more thread in the file, so small I almost turned past it. In the margin of an internal form, a reference code per Q3 staffing plan. I had never been shown a Q3 staffing plan. I didn't even know one existed, but it existed enough to be cited on a form about me, and I wrote the phrase on the back of my hand so I wouldn't lose it. Up to that point, I had been treating this as something that had happened to me, a personal wrong aimed at me that I needed to undo. What changed my understanding was a phone call I almost didn't make. I reached out to a former colleague from the forecasting side, someone who'd left the company a few weeks before I did. I only wanted to ask whether for cause was normal there now, whether I was imagining a pattern out of my own pain. He got very quiet, the same quiet Marcus had gone. Then he told me his own exit had looked almost identical. A sudden meeting, a for cause separation, vague documented concerns with no names attached, a warning he didn't remember receiving. He'd been too shaken and too eager to move on and fight it, and he'd assumed it was just him, some private failure he hadn't seen coming. Hearing my version, he said the thing I'd been circling for 2 weeks out loud. It wasn't us. That was the moment the floor tilted the other way. This wasn't a grudge, and it wasn't a misunderstanding about my hours. The same method had been used on at least 2 of U.S. Manufacture a paper trail, backdate the discipline, tag it for cause, and close the door. A single wrong date is an error. The same maneuver run against 2 different people, weeks apart, is a practice. And both of us, when we compared notes, had the same reference floating at the edge of our paperwork. A staffing plan neither of us had ever been allowed to see. Finding that plan became the whole job. I couldn't pull it from inside anymore, but a document referenced on official forms leaves fingerprints. Between what my former colleagues still had in an old inbox and what had been shared in a planning meeting long before any of this, I was able to reconstruct enough of the Q3 staffing plan to understand what it was. It was a reorganization deck, and in a section headed Planned Reductions, dated in early February, was my position, listed for elimination. 2 full months before the first early departure they would later accuse me of. That was the fact that made everything else finally hold still. The decision to remove me came first in February as a line in a reorg deck. The attendance story came second in March and April, built to fit a conclusion that was already on paper. Any one of those 4 dates could have been a busy manager misreading a timesheet. All 4 of them bent the same direction, on the same schedule as a staffing plan I'd never been shown. That wasn't an error. That was a decision wearing the costume of one. But it still left a question that gnawed at me, because eliminating a role is ordinary. Companies reorganize. If my position was being cut in February, they could simply have laid me off. Severance, a handshake, a reference. Instead, someone had chosen the slower, uglier path of inventing misconduct. Why go to the trouble of manufacturing a for-cause firing when a clean layoff was right there? The answer, when I finally understood it, wasn't a conspiracy. It was an incentive, and incentives are more dangerous than villains because they don't feel like villainy to the person following them. A layoff costs money, severance, paid benefits, an unemployment claim that raises the company's rates. A for-cause termination costs almost nothing. No severance, and benefits stop immediately. And there was a second thing I only pieced together later. The reorg had been pitched upward as clean and controlled, and involuntary layoffs are a number leadership watches. Every position closed as performance instead of reduction kept the layoff count down and made the whole reorganization look tidier to the people Dana answered to. Each firing dressed as cause saved money and protected a metric at once. And Dana, I came to believe, was not the origin of it. She was the instrument of it. She'd been handed a headcount target and a mandate to hit it without the reorg looking like what it was, and somewhere in there she'd made the choice, under pressure to protect her own standing, to take the path that cost the company least and cost us the most. I don't say that to excuse her. Signing your name to dates you know are false is a choice, and she made it more than once to more than one of us. But it mattered to me to understand it honestly, because the truth I'd been building wasn't an evil manager destroyed me. It was quieter and more real than that. A system rewarded making people disappear cheaply, and a frightened manager did the rewarded thing. By then I had it all in one folder. The termination letter with its 4 dates. The badge logs showing I'd left after 6 every one of those days. The backdated warning that described a meeting from a week after its own date. The vague, nameless concerns. The reorg deck listing my role in February. I wasn't guessing anymore. I could lay it on a table in an order that told itself. So I asked for the meeting. Not a shouting match, a meeting. I contacted Priya Nair, an HR business partner I'd always found straight, and I told her I had documentation I needed the company to look at before I took it anywhere else. She agreed. Dana was in the room too, which I hadn't expected, sitting very still. I didn't perform. I put the letter down first and read the 4 dates aloud, the same way HR had read them to me. Then I put the badge logs beside it and read the 4 exit times: 6:38, 7:04, 6:15, 6:47. I let the 2 documents sit next to each other, and I didn't editorialize, because they didn't need me to. Then the warning and the date of the meeting it described, and the 11 days that stood between those 2 facts like confession. Then the February reorg deck with my job in the reductions column. The reactions taught me more than the evidence did. Dana said it had been an impossible quarter, that decisions came from above, that the documentation was standard. When I set the badge times in front of her, she didn't argue them. That was the thing I keep coming back to. She didn't say the logs were wrong. She looked at the 4 times that proved the 4 dates were invented, and she went silent, and the silence said what she wouldn't. Priya, to her credit, didn't perform either. She read every page slowly. Then she closed the folder, and she said the sentence that changed the direction of all of it. We're going to reopen this. What followed wasn't a movie. There was no dramatic vindication, no moment where a room stood up for me. It was slower and more bureaucratic and, in its own way, more satisfying because it was real. HR conducted an actual review with the logs and the metadata and the dates I'd assembled. Weeks later, the outcomes came in a series of quiet letters and calls. My separation was reclassified, struck from for cause, and recorded as a position elimination, which is what it had always truly been, with the severance and the benefits bridge that should have come with it. The backdated warning was pulled from my file. I watched a corrected copy come through with that page gone, and I don't have good words for what it felt like to see my own record made honest again. And the company changed a rule. Attendance-based discipline would now have to be checked against the access logs before it could stand. The very record that had cleared me became the thing that had to be consulted before they did this to anyone else. Dana wasn't marched out. She was placed under review, her documentation practices examined, her authority to close separations on her own signature removed. I found I didn't need more than that. I'd spent enough nights imagining her downfall to know it wouldn't have given me back a single evening with my son. What I wanted was the truth on the record and the door closed on the practice, and I got both. It cost more than the letters showed. I lost 4 months to it. 4 months of nights spent building a folder instead of building anything for us. Eli felt it. The way kids feel the weather in a house, even when you think you've hidden the storm. He asked me once, carefully, if we were going to be okay, and I had to be honest that I was working on it. Being right didn't erase that. The truth has a price, and part of being an adult is paying it without pretending it was free. They offer me my role back, reclassified and clean. I thought about it longer than I expected to. In the end, I didn't take the old desk. Not out of bitterness. I just couldn't walk back into a place and sit under a system I now understood too well to trust. What I took was the corrected record, the severance that let me breathe while I found the next thing, and a certainty about my own worth that no letter could touch anymore. I still have the badge holder. The card inside is deactivated, useless, a rectangle of dead plastic. But behind it there's still that lopsided copper sun Eli drew me, the one he made so the building would know I had somewhere to get back to. It turned out the building did keep a record of me, just not the one they tried to write. The doors knew when I left. The logs knew. The truest account of my reliability wasn't in any file a manager could edit. It was in the quiet, honest record of a set of doors, and in a crayon drawing that had been telling me the whole time where I actually belonged. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that the calm, careful record you keep of your own life is not paranoia. It's the only version of the story you'll fully control. Have you ever looked back and realized the decision about you had already been made, long before anyone told you the reason? I'd genuinely like to hear it. Tell me in the comments. And if these are the kinds of stories that stay with you, you know where to find the rest.